Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. You know, there are certain months and seasons in Phish history that represent more than just a page on a calendar. For example, August 93, Fall 97, June 94, but there is one that overrides them all. December 95, of course. A month that not only has some of the best music of Phish's 40-year career, but it's also a month that represents their ascent from large theaters and college campuses to city center arenas across the nation. Today's guest, Jeff Carroll, brings us to the very beginning of that month as we discuss Phish's show from December 1st, 1995 at Hershey Park Arena. 1 month before the band would conquer Madison Square Garden on New Year's Eve, they laid waste to central Pennsylvania by demonstrating everything they had mastered up to that point and every reason a fan would want to go see Phish. Musical mastery, a dash of Gamehendge, and Fishman running around the stage in a light-up cape after singing some late-stage Elvis. But according to Jeff, there was much more to this show than even all that. So let's join Jeff to chat about When Stash Goes Dark, Shakespeare, and amusement park Phish as we break down December 1st, 1995 at Hershey Park Arena in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Jeff, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Brian. Really appreciate it. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here because you picked a show, and I really should expand it to a year that, for as amazing as it is rarely picked on Attendance Bias. It seems like 1999 has the runaway lead, but now we're going just a few years prior. But in terms of Phish's development and evolution, it could be an entire world earlier. You picked December 1st, 1995 at Hershey Park Arena. Very few people have chosen shows from 1995, and so I'm really excited to dig into it with you because as far as I'm concerned, there's an endless amount of information and chatter for that calendar year and even just for this tour.
Yeah, this month, this tour, this year, just so much happened to the band, and I was lucky enough to be there for quite a bit of it in December, actually. I'm really excited to talk about the show. It's one that I have talked about on my crowd control, and any friend who will listen, and any Phish fan I talk to who will listen, and any music fan I talk to who will listen. I say, if you're going to listen to anything live, start here, man. This is just an incredible, incredible show with so much energy. And I couldn't believe how excited I was when they released it, because I used to have this really bad tape of it that I kind of wore out because I listened to it so much. So I'm really excited to talk about it with you.
Me too. I think I had probably the same recording as you, where it stayed on my tape rack for years and years, Hershey 12195, and I would always pass over it when I was going over what do I want to listen to. And every once in a while I'd press play and I go, oh, that's why. That's why.
It was so hazy and bad. There was a lot of hiss. I think the venue was really difficult for the tapers to get right. It was an old hockey arena, it was 100 years old, had bad acoustics. Like, you could tell when they started the show that, this is going to be a rough recording. And even the re-release, I think there's some softness in some of in Mike and Page. You don't really hear them come through as much in certain parts as you might in a more modern recording or something they officially did. Yeah, for sure.
Well, we'll get into everything, 95, Hershey, the music itself. But first, let's get to know you with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So, Jeff, when was your first Phish show, and what do you remember from it?
Sure. My first Phish show was 10/8/94 in Fairfax, Virginia. What I remember about it was in my hometown from where I grew up, and I had moved to Princeton. And so my brother had gone to Bethlehem, PA the night before at Lehigh at the Stable Arena, saw that show, picked me up, drove down with a friend from high school and him itself. And then we picked up a friend from Virginia and went over about a mile away from where I grew up and at George Mason University, really small place, beautiful fall day. Couldn't have been better. Very, very cool crowd and small little venue, and went in and just had my head blown away by these guys. I had tapes and things I'd known about them. Been very heavily involved in their past and the lore and Gamehendge, and had been digging in, but had never seen them, and had seen concerts live like DMB and Blues Traveler and Rolling Stones and stuff like that. But this was something different, and I knew it from the second they opened with Chalk Dust, which at the time was my favorite tune, because I was a kid, and it just blew me away. The whole show, the crowd, the energy, everything.
And how old were you, and how old was your brother?
I was 15, so I just turned 15 that summer, and I was in 8th grade, I think, or 9th grade. And my brother was a junior, so he would have been about 17. So he drove. And I do remember this guy at a rest stop, like one of the Maryland houses or one of those
Sure.
things. Like, obviously, like an old head. And he was like, "Do you guys have an extra seat for us?" And we were like, "No, we're picking up a friend." And he was like, "Oh, really? I have like a bunch of acid and trinkets you can have." And we were like, "Oh, no." Like, "No, we're good." We're like 16 and 15 and 17 years old. I think we'll pass on the trinkets and the acid. And then we stopped at an old friend's house where we stayed that night, which was just around the corner. So it was really, really just a great experience, first time all around. And they played kind of everything you want to hear. They did acoustic, they did, epic stuff. They did stuff I knew. It was really, really great. A Gaiute was the second time they've ever played it. And I think they played it the night before.
Yeah, they did. It was debuted on the 7th. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was like really cool. I was kind of hoping to hear it. My brother's like, they don't repeat stuff, so like you won't hear it. And then the like third or fourth song in, I was like, oh my God, here it is. It's so cool. But no, it was a great experience. And like a lot of people, like my older brother took me.
It's so funny how much things change, but also how they stay the same, where you could stop anywhere on the way to a show in 2023 and someone could ask you the same exact question. You have an extra, hey, I got trades and whatever that may be, right? Drugs or whatever. And my first show, which was in 97 at Madison Square Garden, I was behind the stage and some guy was just asking me to stand up so he can get by me, get to his seat. And as he was walking by me, he's like, "Hey, having a good show?" Like, innocuous banter. I said, "Yeah, sure. It's great." And I don't know anything. And he just pulled out a joint right out of his pocket and just tried to give it to me.
You're like, sure. I mean, that I would have probably done. Maybe not side of the highway rest stop drugs, but
but I was 15 also. And it's shocking.
It was impactful. Yeah, it was impactful. Like, and also like how many people I could sort of tell were, once you got there, we actually saw that guy there and he was like, "If I ever see anyone messing with this car, I'm going to kick it." And we were like, "Oh man, this guy's cool, but also a little bizarre." But no, I mean, it was like the circus, you walk down, there was a little shakedown in front of it. And it was just really, really neat for me to see people, hacky sacking and throwing Frisbee around and drinking cold beers. And I think I had my first beer at a show there, like that I'd ever had, like sitting there with my brother and his friends and, probably like a Bud Light or something, but like, it was really like a nice moment. And, he and I have bonded over Phish since that day. I mean, since we were young, he lives pretty close. We still go to MSG shows together and talk about it. And like everybody have our little opinions about each moment, but we always have a blast.
What was the most recent show you saw?
I saw the 12/30/22. So the night before the last most recent New Year's. I loved it. I thought it was probably the best of the 4 nights personally. Close second to 29th, which I was also at with some friends and my wife. I thought it had one of the best themes of 3.0 or 4.0. I'm not sure what we're calling it, honestly.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. But one of the best themes in recent memory. They played an outstanding Reba, which is one of just my tunes I love. I really like the howling. I like where it's coming along. It's like, feels like a really fun new song that kind of in that 2001 vibe that like really gets the crowd dancing and moving. So I loved that. And a rare foam that was played really well.
Yeah, both of those are rare. Yeah.
Yeah. And so both of those things are rare. And so I was like, kind of like, this is great. And then they did a Chalk Dust only encore, which I was like, wait, like, have I ever seen that, in the hundreds of shows I've been to? And I was like, no, I've never seen just that. It's been something Chalk Dust bubble. And so I looked back and there's only been like 11 or 12 ever since they debuted the song in 91. So it was a really great show. And I think they're playing really, really well. And, especially at the MSG, which we're going to get 7 of this summer. And it's pretty wild that they're just playing this well, this late in the game, so to speak.
If someone asked you for a recommendation to get them into Phish, like you were just saying a little earlier, I've never heard them before. What would you recommend? What should I listen to? What's your answer?
I would say Rift for me. Rift was the album. Like I had Picture of Nectar and I had Lawn Boy from my brother that I'd stolen, but like Rift was the one that like, I remember when it came out, I remember getting it. I remember being excited about it. And the whole thing just blew me away. Right. I always kind of want it to be Picture of Nectar that I want to give people, because to me that kind of represents Phish as like a set. Like you could actually look at that CD track list and be like, oh, that's a set, like that they played.
And it's a long album too.
And it's a long album and it's really cool. And like, it's got really great versions of everything. You got Stash and Tweezer on there and Mango Song, stuff like that. But I think honestly it's Rift, like, cause I would say like, look, listen to this and you can get thematically around it if people are into that. It It has that, concept feel that some people can gravitate towards. It has really good songs, and obviously, and yeah, that's what I would probably choose. I also sometimes think if I'm trying to get them into Phish now, like tomorrow.
Yeah, that's an interesting divergence of that question. If someone was if you had an extra ticket for one of these 7 MSG shows and you invited a friend who had never listened to Phish, like they're just going for the show, and they said, well, what should I listen to get ready? Would it still be Rift?
No, I honestly think, and this is probably going to get some people angry, like I would say Sigma Oasis. I think
I would too. That's a good answer.
Yeah, I think they did a really good job of capturing like what they are now, and then their live, capabilities with Thread and like some of the extended jams and everything's right. Like, and you would hear a lot of that, right? Like, you want people to go in and hear a lot of it. So like in '94, my first show, like every album up to that point was represented, but that was all they had. Other than like Mike's song and Harry Hood, a couple that hadn't made it on, like everything that I heard was like something I'd listened to on an album. And nowadays, I think you have a better chance of that if you handed someone Sigma Oasis.
Oh, for sure. And the funny thing about that, Steam is on Sigma Oasis.
Right.
And that debuted in 2011? So 9 years after it played. Yeah.
Right. And so like you could still get some of that. But like, again, I think at the end of the day, I hand someone Rift if I really think like, okay, there's a chance of this person getting into this band. And I do have a couple of converts late in life, which I'm actually kind of very proud of.
Right. So Phish going strong, you and your friends going strong.
Correct. Absolutely.
What's your favorite post-show snack? A show's over. Let's say it's summer tour, right? You just get out of the Man. Mm-hmm. What do you go for?
Well, the Man, I would probably be near a Wawa. So I would have previously gone to a Wawa, got myself a nice little shorty, thrown it in the cooler, and then when I get out, have a cooler, a Wawa shorty hoagie, and then an ice cold water. That's what I would do. That's like my summer tour thing, is like, because I'm usually like, okay, I can find a Wawa around there. And then if it's an indoor show, it's usually like a pretzel outside, because you can kind of get like a hot pretzel. You can get that in Philly, you can get that in New York, you can get that everywhere. And if it's at MSG, it's the pizza place right beneath it, right as I catch the train.
Oh, Rose's.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Right now, just so you know, I was at Penn Station fairly recently. Right now, Rose's is not open, not because the business is closed, but because they're always doing perpetual construction in Penn Station. And right now, that area by 8th Avenue is like not shut down, but all the businesses are closed off.
Oh, so it's a mess. There's no Krispy Kreme right now. There's no elevator or escalator out of the station. I work in New York, so I go in quite a bit, and yeah, it's that place is always kind of a mess, but it's our mess, I suppose.
Yeah, get a 40 of Hogarden and 2 slices of pizza or something.
Exactly, for like $7. It's a pretty good deal. Yeah,
Phish classic.
I'll take it. I'll take it anytime. Anytime I'm in New York and I can get a slice of pie, I'm going to do it.
Pop quiz. How do you pronounce the title of Phish's first studio album?
Oh, God. I say Junta, but I know it's Junta.
I'm the same way.
I say Junta, just as how we said it then. But I always said Junta, so I still say it.
Finally, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
Oh, God. I don't want to keep going back to the Man, but there was like a couple that was, doing that thing, but that was more alarming than weird. But I think really the weirdest one.
Wait, on the lawn inside the venue?
On the lawn inside the venue, like with a bunch of people around. It was wild. And I was like, that was my second and third show at the Man. So it was, summer '95. It was, I just turned 16, or I hadn't even yet, because the shows were in June. And I was like, so I was still, a little kid. And I was like, I kind of knew that concept, that I just never seen anyone do that in public. But I really think the true one is like Big Cypress, 5 a.m., stayed up all night with a bunch of people. It's really quiet. Like, it was never as quiet at a Phish show ever, I think, as that moment, like right before the sun came up and they were starting to jam before they, did Meat Stick and stuff. And everyone started to like kind of know that the sun was going to come up and dawn was going to get us, and the band was up there, and like we were all kind of looking around at bodies everywhere of like hippies and dudes everywhere, but everyone started to kind of stand up and realize this moment, and we were all kind of high-fiving and real quiet, and then all of a sudden, like, we kind of all realized collectively that the band had done this. Do
you remember what music was playing, if they were even playing a song, or it's just jamming at that point?
It was just jamming at that point. I mean, honestly, I couldn't even tell you if I knew the exact moment, but it was just like you started to hear this sort of murmur again and like people kind of getting up for it. And that was like the weirdest thing, because to me, it was like a collective of people that were so zonked out and had been at this, festival for 3 days and had just stayed up for 8 hours, so to speak, or however long, even if you went to sleep. I never did. My buddy Brad and I just powered through the whole thing, and we were pretty darn tired at the end of that. But that's a moment I thought was so weird, that like everyone can have the same feeling and just from the same experience, right? Like it was really cool. And I think like knowing that the band had achieved that, it was a weird moment. Like what other band plays for 8 straight hours and doesn't stop? And, that whole, and that vibe that they had built was really incredible, and something I'll never experience ever again. And none of us will, I think, that were there. It was really, really, really weird.
When was this show played?
Well, let's dig into today's show, or at least the timing around it. So the show itself was played on December 1st, 1995. At first, when I was getting ready to speak with you, I wrote out this whole long monologue or essay almost about fall 95. And then I found out that about a third is really about December 95, because fall 95 is enormous. The tour began on September 27th and ended on December 17th. That's a full season. That's a quarter of the year, 54 shows.
That's more than they do in a year now.
Yeah.
And it was one tour. It's crazy. And then how it all sort of culminates in this, epic moment that is December 95, right? Like, I saw the beginning of December 95, the middle and the end, and every bit of it was what people talk about, right? When they remember it. I just wish more people could have seen it. It was incredible. They were just on every level. This band was coming into their own and earning like everything that they had earned and worked hard for, right? Like every show was better than the next. I mean, every night I walked out of those 6 shows I saw in December, I was like, that was the best show I've ever seen. That was the best show I've ever seen. I think I was not alone in that feeling, right? Of like, okay, we're here, we're witnessing something special. And even though I'd only been to like 5 or 6 shows at that point, I was like, I get it. Like, this is special. I've never seen anyone or any group of people do what these 4 guys were doing on stage in my life, like, or anywhere close to it. And I never have since, really.
Yeah. And it needs to be noted culturally, we did not have the sorts of communications that we have today, right? We didn't have phones. We couldn't post our thoughts about what was happening in real time or immediately after. Even before cell phones, when people would go home to their computers, right, and post on Phish.net. People still do that, but there's a billion other sources of info. In 1995, if you weren't there and didn't feel it and didn't have the conversations with the people in the lot beforehand, you couldn't really get a sense for what it was like while you were there. And even us talking about it now, I'm learning from you, right? I can't speak to it in the first person. Another guest that I had, my friend Damon, was on. He talked about a show from this tour that was in Montana, and he said a big aspect or a big concept of the fall 95 tour that kind of gets lost while talking about the music is the fact that Jerry Garcia had died just a few months earlier
in August.
In August. And that was always a topic of conversation in the crowd. And when you talk about Phish coming into their own, that may have happened regardless of the Grateful Dead going or dying, regardless. But it just kind of added to that. Well, who else is around at this level now?
Absolutely. You even started to see it at the shows, like a kind of an older crowd started to kind of like drop in, so to speak, right? It's one of those things I sort of remember, like in 94, like everyone was really young and, for the most part, like everyone was my age or a little older, like kind of teenagers to college age. And then in that fall and that year, you started to see it kind of shift a little bit. And yeah, like the death of Jerry in August of 95 was, a huge blow to the community of people who like to travel and see lots of shows and the jam band scene, right? I put quotes around that. Yeah, I remember where I was the day that happened. I remember I was at my friend Chris and Pete's house. We were literally hacky sacking in the backyard, and news came on the radio. Like they stopped the radio and we're like, Jerry Garcia has passed away at the age of blah blah blah. And it was, we were mini deadheads. We weren't like we were way more Phish heads than Deadheads, but we knew the Dead, and our older brothers were big Deadheads, and it was impactful in the area I grew up. Like the Dead and Phish were big in the area I grew up. I grew up where kind of Trey grew up, and so it was a big part of that. And so many people where I grew up in this rural part of New Jersey outside of Princeton were into the Dead. I mean, it was a real moment, and I'll never forget that. But yeah, it definitely had an effect on them, and I think them not kind of ever really addressing it, right, until years later. I think in Merriweather, or no, Virginia Beach, where they play.
Yeah, 98.
Yeah, like they never ever like musically addressed it. I think they did some stuff in California once on the anniversary or Jerry's birthday or something like that. And they'd mentioned, hey, like this, and they did a couple of songs, but not like that, right? They never said like, oh, we're comfortable playing this, but they just went out and did their thing that fall tour like they've never done. I mean, and then it culminates in this month where they literally blow the doors off of every venue they went into.
Yeah, and you brought up Big Cypress just a little bit earlier. A friend of mine who has been on the show did, I think, all of December 99, that entire tour.
That was fun.
Yeah, and it's even more fun to listen back now because we talked earlier about poor recording quality. So many of those shows in the original, like just when we were switching over from tapes to CDs and digital for some people who had DAT recorders or MP3 CD players, there's so much better quality recordings now of that December 99 run. So now, at least speaking from my point of view, I could appreciate it more than I did at the time. But my point is that he did that entire December tour, and he said that it was in the air. You could feel it, that it was a big run up to Big Cypress. But it was just like a shirt that everyone was wearing the same shirt. Like everyone was excited for it.
Everyone had put the same hat on. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you, this December 95, you said you went to several shows on this month tour. Was there that similar feeling leading up to New Year's at Madison Square Garden, or was it still kind of discovering everything for the first time and not as on the nose?
So I absolutely think more people were discovering Phish for the first time at that point, right? But I think the crowd that knew, right? Like the people that knew, we knew, and it was being talked about for sure. Of course, like you mentioned, it wasn't like I could get on a blog and it would take me like 25 minutes to download a set list from the night before on my dial-up, and if my mom picked the phone up, poof, it was gone. It would literally go line by line, and just to see what it was, and that was like text. And to your point, so like the communication and the energy that I felt, I was there in 99 too. And that was really like the internet was around, you could email. It was like, the community was huge. The band was sort of changing. This 95 was very organic in that way, where if you were there and talking to people, you knew this was crazy. And you knew, like, after the show, like the next day was a Saturday, I found a guy who had a ticket to New Haven and was like, I'm going to that. Like, that's what it was. Like, I knew that. And everyone was talking about how incredible it was. So, but not like on the internet, right? Like it wasn't like you could have to talk to, like you said, you'd have to find someone who went to the show from your high school and be like, oh, did you see, like, can you believe that? And then of course tapes were much harder to get back then. So you weren't like getting a tape. I didn't get this 12/195 tape until February or, March, because I remember it was starting to get warm when I started walking to school with it. And so it wasn't as like what 99 was. And there wasn't this big thing of like, you were going to travel hundreds of miles and they're going to play all night. But of course, the MSG was really special, and that, they'd only played there a couple times before. This felt like the next step up from that 94 one, right? Like, okay, here, boom, we're now here, we're headlining it. And I mean, just when you walked in the door on just every show of 95, like when that stage lights were on the stage, it was just incredible. You could not wait for these guys to get on there because you knew they were just going to blow your mind.
And they had a chess game going on too.
Right. And they had this little gag, right? They always had these, and they were so funny, and like they were still had that element, right? Which I think some of that had gone away by 99. I think 97, the Phish Destroys America tour kind of took some of their jokiness away because they started taking the musicianship to kind of another level. And I think that's kind of when they started to stop like criticizing and being a little bit more, have it flow a little bit more. 95 was amazing, and we knew it. We just didn't have the means to sort of shout it out loud, so to speak.
Right. Well, that's the big picture. Let's zoom in a little bit, Jeff, on you and who you were in December 1995. So what led you to this show?
Yeah, so this was like I I'm finally alone in the house with my parents. My brother's off to college. I have this group of friends who's like super into music, and we're starting to explore music ourselves in terms of instruments and stuff like that. And this was my first mail order ticket. I remember that. This is the first one I ever sent out for mail and got, and I still have it. And on the back of it is the set list. And I think I write simple with a question mark. I could go dig it up because I thought they were trying to get there. Anyway, we'll get to that part. But again, I was 16 years old, sophomore in high school. My mom said I could go if I found someone to drive me, because she's like, I'm not driving you to Hershey, PA on a Friday night. And so a friend of mine who was a senior was like, I'll drive you, and I had a ticket and I had an extra for him. And he had never seen Phish, but he was like, I know that they're fun, so I'll go with you. I was like, cool. So he drove me. We went after literally waited till school to end and got the car, Princeton, New Jersey, and drove to PA. And it was freezing cold. I remember that. But again, so that's who I was then. And, I'd been to a few Phish shows and started to really get into this scene. And yeah, I was really like kind of looking for any experience to go or any chance to go because I had enjoyed the experience so much. And again, my parents were like really cool. They were like, we trust you. And granted, I think if they had sort of known a little bit about it more, if there was the internet, I guess, then they might have been like, okay, well, we're going to go with you. I was a latchkey kid, right? Both my parents worked. And so I had to come home and, call them, make sure, tell them I was home. I had to make myself food for, pretty early age. So it was, and I was never one to like, oh man, I'm going to go so crazy I can't control myself. Like that. That's not what was fun for me about that. Like, I know some people like to go to shows for that, but like after that first show in '94, I was like, that band comes on, I'm locked in. Like, yeah. I feel like I don't breathe sometimes. Like, there's moments where I'm like, I don't think I've taken a breath in 5 minutes during a jam, right? I'm like I have to remember to do it almost. Like it becomes involuntary.
Of all the shows that you could have chosen to speak about today, why do you have attendance bias toward this one?
Oh man, if my friends could talk, I talk about the show all the time, all the time. And I could basically listen to any two notes and know what it's this. I think it was just a very special time. Like it started that December run. I would go to like 5 more, which are all very meaningful to me, right? And Pennsylvania has been a very influential part in my Phish experience because I lived in between New York and Philly. So it was always like I could get to both of them. But Philly kind of had this like, I don't know, rougher, kind of more raw feel to it to me. And
still does.
Yeah, still does. And this place, I mean, it's hard to describe it. Lots of people who've talked about the show, but you get there and it's like this big parking lot and it's an amusement park. It's like literally an amusement park. They had decorated it for Christmas. And so when you're walking into this 100-year-old hockey stadium, now it's 100 years old, there was like a million lights and like giant candy canes and bows, and it was really surreal, right? And there's like music going from the ground, like, but that was like theme park music, right? It was like do 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 do, Yep. It was wild. And of course you get there at like 5 o'clock and it's completely dark, and so like you're kind of tailgating in the dark for a little bit, and it's really cold and windy because you're out in this middle of Hershey, PA. It's really flat, so the wind's howling, and then you get in there and it's warm and it's this dank old, like you could feel the condensation on the metal, right? Like it had a smell to it, like an old
it's like the Nassau Coliseum or Hampton, exactly like that. Any one of those.
Yeah, and it's just this old hockey shed, and you could feel the history of the Bears there, the Hershey Bears, and like all this stuff. And then I don't know, like everything about it. The band came out there, like Trey had short hair, which I hadn't seen yet, and like I think Mike was wearing like a vest. And the crowd was just like, it was a sold out crowd. It was a small place. I mean, it was 8,500 seats. It might be one of the smaller venues I have ever seen them in.
Well, they were making the jump then, right? I mentioned this on the last episode that I've done about October 95 or fall 95, where to me, this tour is that scene in Almost Famous, one of my favorite movies, where Jimmy Fallon, the manager from the big record company, comes. He's like, do you know how to do a headlining tour? Right. Do you know how to stop the ice beneath Chicago Stadium from freezing? And it's like, this is where they were learning to build up this touring mechanism. And they were still playing 8,500 seat arenas, but by the end of the month, they're selling out Madison Square Garden.
Correct. And that's a great way to put it. Cause you're like, you look at the tour and like where they go on the dates. Like, I think they had to drive like 500 miles from like their last stop before this one. And then the next night's Connecticut. And then they're all over the place. And you can see some of those like early mistakes they're making as they're starting to play these bigger places, but want to play them, right? Like you could tell at this time that they really wanted to play and, and had the energy, and, they didn't have families and wives and stuff like that. And so it was like, they wanted to get out there. They were still super psyched about, getting that message out there to people and playing for people. And so, yeah, so like another reason why I picked the show is it's sort of like, it's not one of the ones that everyone talks about, right? It's not December 31st or the 30th. It's, it's not the 9th with the amazing YEM. Like I remember that blowing my head off too, but it doesn't have this myth about it, but it should. It's literally like they talk about like the mythical land of chocolate. So it had all this fun elements that Phish like meant for me at the time, right? Like, they crushed a couple of songs I like. We'll get into that. Like, and nothing was going like super long in the first set, and it was just so much energy and the vibe of the crowd and the way that you knew the band was very aware of where they were, right? Like they just knew, and I think they got a kick out of it. And I think that's one of the reasons that I have bias towards the show. The guy I was with was having such a blast. I mean, he took some stuff for the first time and had a little bit of a challenge at one point. You could probably guess what it is, but and then we had a blast. Like I had to drive home because he was on this substance, but I had my learner's permit. And like, so it was this really good adventure, right? It's like when you're young, it's about all these things about being independent and being a little bit away from home, but being able to get back. Like it was really just a really special day. And a lot of our friends from high school had also gone. And so we were starting to see like a collective of group of kids in our school that were going, right, and that were of all ages, and there was none of that like ageism or my class, your class, because everyone was like, we're here to see Phish, and it was like cool, right? Like the older guys were like super young, like cool to me because they're like, yeah, man, like this kid's cool, he's into Phish, like let's just all go in together. It was fun.
Set one.
Well, let's break down the music.
Let's do it.
You said how excited the band was to play and how they wanted to really they didn't let up. Look at the first set opener and the follow-up, Buried Alive and Down with Disease.
Yeah.
Like, if that doesn't say it all.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but like, if they play Buried Alive as an opener, you're going to get some crazy show, apparently. And I didn't know that then. And I have that firm belief now.
I agree.
And this show did that to me. Like when they come out with that, that driving, fun little quick blast of just, and you're immediately into it. And I think they actually played with the acoustics like right then, because they obviously did a sound check, but I think they were like, we got to do something that just heats this place up like immediately. And they jumped off and everyone went with them. And it was first time I'd seen that opener, obviously. And I've never seen one quite like that since.
And right into Down with Disease, a trademark of 1995 Phish, right, is no dead time at all.
Ever.
Now they might, and for the last 10 years or whatever, they might stop after a song. Trey goes around and talks to each member, tells them what he might want to play next. I assume, I have no idea what he's saying.
Get a sip of water.
Right. Sip of water, whatever it is. But there is no downtime at all, right? The last note of Buried Alive is the first note of Down with Disease. So it's immediate drop. My expectation was a lot of Machine Gun Trey just like leading the way, because that's what mid-90s Down with Diseases were. But I was very pleasantly surprised that he was following the chord progression and playing a lot of rhythm, actually.
Yeah, and that's so I totally agree. Like, right, like Mike goes boom, and there's a couple of like right to his part, and there's actually a couple of those in the show where like Paige does one with Mango song. It's like it's awesome. Like, but this version is literally, I say pound for pound, like the best 95 Phish. If you took like the 6 minutes and condensed it into what they represented, and and it just sounds so like perfect to me. The energy, right? Him and Fishman are just jiving off of one another. Trey does stay in that lane, that kind of was within the chord progression, like you mentioned, but it really works. And he really does a lot of creative things within that framework.
Yeah, I wrote it's not jamming, but it's insane guitar rock.
Yeah, and it's perfect for it because they just shot out of a cannon, right? And now there's like the explosion of the thing they just shot off, right? And I was blown away then by this version. Like I knew, like as soon as that note ended, I was like, that was amazing, and I can't wait. I can't wait to hear a clean version of that. It took me like 10, 15 years to get a clean version of this thing, but once I did, and you could hear the notes just so perfectly and how well they're intertwined, all four of them within this just really quick thing, and like that'll kind of be a theme throughout the set, no pun intended, because of the next song. But they're concise, quick, but really fulfilling jam sections in this first set that I find to be what makes the show really special. Like everything is just like a little bit of an up tempo, right? Like every song just has a little bit more than the speed than they normally had at this time, and you could kind of feel it.
Yeah, and I have one idea in mind, like the Halley's Comet. When we get there, to me, that's when that idea sunk in. When it's just a little bit more than usual.
Everything's just a little extra. Yeah, it's everything's at 11. I think they turned everything to 11 to use a bad joke, but.
Another music movie. So we'll just keep those coming. But Theme from the Bottom, like you mentioned, is next. It debuted in 1995. It was played 26 times in 1995. You could hear throughout, we're at the end of the year calendar wise, they're still like futzing with it. There's still like a tweak here, a change there, but it's still for the most part the song that we know.
Yeah, if you listen to that first version, I think was at like the Lowell Mass show.
Yes,
or one of those.
May 16th. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything there's a little rough, right? Like Free and like all the stuff that kind of didn't through too. But I had heard Theme at the Man Music Center that summer and was like, oh, that song's cool. Like I hadn't heard it yet because it hadn't been on the tapes yet. But I was like, I knew then. I was like, this song's fun. But this is the version that really grabbed me and made this one of my it is one of my all-time favorite Phish songs of all time. I love when they get into this kind of pumping, kind of soaring jam that they get into this. It's very structural, but I just love it. Trey can really play around with that kind of soaring feeling. And this one, again, has that like, his little hi-hat like is a little quicker than normal, and everything's just a little bit more focused. And again, I think they could, within that, the sort of jam section, I really feel like the band was playing with the sonic architecture of that room. Like
100%.
I feel like they were doing that and we're conscious of it. And so you can really feel it on the tapes in the recording, in my view.
And they used it to their advantage. And there's a point at about 6 minutes where I thought this isn't really a jam. To me, it sounded more like a wall of sound.
Like this blob of energy that's just like kind of reverberating off the walls. And like I remember where I was sitting, I was sort of like on the Fishman side and kind of had a view of the whole arena, from peripheral, and you could actually kind of almost hear what the band was hearing, where you'd hear this whap and it would sort of whap, it would go back. And I think they were actually so adept at their instruments and their sound and their engineering that they were able to kind of mess around with that a little bit. And I'm sure the recordings picked up on some of that.
Oh, for sure. And Trey has said, I think it was in the Phish book, he said that when you learn or when you start playing arenas, you have to relearn how to play music. Right. And I think that's probably what he means, that you're hearing your own music twice, like bounce off the back of the arena, mixed in with the crowd reaction.
Yeah. And it's never the same when you're doing a sound check, right? Because there's no bodies in there. There's no warmth. There's not that moisture. There's not the smoke in the air. It all changes. And so like, that's why I love this band. Like they're able to leverage that and change with it throughout the show and kind of evolve. It's really special. And this song has all, like, if I say like the most fishy song there is, right, like outside of some of the big composed things, this one really speaks to me. It's like kind of written right in this moment, and has water in it, like all the stuff.
Of course.
Yeah, we had
water.
a beer for every song that had water in it. It'd be hard to leave the show.
And they follow up theme from the bottom with Poor Heart, which is, at least in terms of flow of a set, a break, but it's still fast, it's peppy, it's energetic. It's just a little less heady than what's already been played.
Totally. And that's funny you say that, because I was sort of looking at this show again. And I'm like, man, there's no break. There's no breather. You get none.
Right.
I mean, and this is the breather of the set. It's like, okay, we're going to get 3 minutes of like a song probably most people know or have heard, or at least think is amusing. And even that, its tempo is just up a little bit. It's just that everything's again, and Trey's solo is like a little faster, and it seems to have just this little bit more energy. And yeah, but it's Poor Heart.
Yeah, right. You could still go to the bathroom. You're not going to miss anything you haven't.
Exactly. If they jam Poor Heart this summer at Lawn Boy, then maybe we'll start sticking around for Poor Heart.
Yeah, we'll have to eat our words. I'll be happy to do it.
Poor Heart's when I usually look at my notes and my phone and make sure I don't have any texts from my wife or anything.
After Poor Heart, after the break, right? Tell Fishman that's a break with the speed he's playing. They go to Wolfman's Brother, which what I noticed most from this Wolfman's Brother, because we're not at the funk Wolfman's Brother. That would come in about a year and a half or so. We're not quite there, but it's still funky. But even though it's a slower Phish song, this recurring theme of it being a little bit faster, having a little mustard on it, is on this. But what came to my mind when listening to this for the first time was all the different guitar effects that Trey has. Like there's a delay at about 1.5 minutes. And then they're playing it so well that at 2 minutes, Trey says he liked the last line so much that he's just going to sing it again. And I happen to think that Quadrophenia, which was played right in the smack middle of this tour and it's a double album, right? And it was extremely overwrought and produced by The Who. The original was that I think Trey really had to explore his sound to do his best to match. And I think we're by December, about a month later, we're really starting to reap the benefits of that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that too, because this isn't like a song they were playing a lot, right? Like it wasn't like nowadays where you might get a Wolfman's like every 2 or 3 nights and it's going to go deep and things like that, or 97 where you get one that could be 20 minutes. And they never deviated from it, right? Like unless they had like the Giant Country Horns one that they did at the Beacon Theater, like that spring of 94. But it wasn't a song like people were, necessarily excited to see. But this one, I thought, like you said, had a little bit more energy. He's really messing around with like wah-wahs and, some of these sort of digital repeat effects. And like he says, like, I think he sang the wrong part over just the regular lyrics. I can't remember. Like, it's something like that. But he says, yeah, I loved it so much, I'm going to do it again. And everyone cheers. And, and again, that's like own your flubs, right? Like
I happen to think that I think the backing vocals were missing. I think he sang the line and the oohs and ahs from Mike and Page weren't there. So I think that's why, but like you said, he was owning the flub and just kind of coming back around to it. But this is what makes and does make this audience band bond so special and so tight. Like how many bands would not do that? Every single other one.
And call it out, right? And like try to hide it or like smooth it over, cover it in sand. And they're like, nope, I'm gonna speak into the mic and say something that isn't supposed to be part of it. Know that I'm paying attention, right? Like he pays attention, they pay attention. So therefore they have earned that from us. We can be very critical as a fan base, right? I think kind of sometimes overly critical of this band that's given us so much like joy and music, right? But it's funny. And so I remember laughing out loud. I was like, oh my God, he's going to do it. Like, cause I knew the song pretty well at that point. And I even think it has a little bit of a jam. Like the vocal part is, they do this like, ba, 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 da, and it's like, they're kind of playing around with it, moving it around. It's definitely not what it's going to be. But it's fun. It was a fun little song. And at the time was a very first set tune, really, really upbeat and fast and energy. You can hear him laughing and having a good time.
Yeah. And those same descriptors could be the next song. Your best friend, Chalked Torture, all reliable. The jam starts, and I expected much more of what I also expected during Down with Disease. I expected Machine Gun Trey to show up, and that's right. A bit, and that was more on point with this one. Like there were a lot of Trey-led rock, but maybe there's some, I thought there would be some spontaneous time signatures or cat and mouse with Fishman and Trey. And that's pretty much what we saw, but it's pedal to the metal for the full song.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot like Down with Disease, like you hear, so in this recording, you hear a lot of Fishman and Trey, like up in the mix, I think. And you actually can still hear like Fishman's foot pedal, which you don't really hear anymore. But those two were just like, you could tell, like those two were just on it that night. Right. And when you get them kind of looking over each other and testing each other, Fishman's kind of always the winner, or I guess they're both the winners. But
we're the winners.
We're the winners. But yeah, it's just, this one's just like a pumping 1995, get it out of the way, Chalk Dust. Just, people haven't seen this song before, or don't know this band.
And this is where the mystique comes in. This wouldn't be the same show at all without the next part, which is Forbin's Mockingbird. You talked about the mystical land of chocolate. Yep. This is what takes a show that's really energetic. Oh, December 95, I was there, that was sick. But this is what makes it legendary. This is something that cannot be recreated on tape through a podcast. You had to be there for this.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked for a little bit, and we're 4 songs in, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like, bang. I mean, you kind of knew back then that if you were going to get one of these narrations, that they were becoming increasingly more rare, and like the stories were becoming a little bit, little stranger and odder. But this one was like so on point, like such a moment for it, right? Like we're in this amusement park. It's the land of chocolate. Let's play, Forbin's Mockingbird and have this narration. And then he literally kind of just, he talks about the rhombus a lot, and near New Jersey is a place called King of Prussia Mall, and there's a good
Wegmans there too in King of Prussia.
That's right. And nowadays, yeah, for sure. When I knew that mall, obviously it was across the river and stuff. It was just so funny, like everything about it. He's like, if you're in this field on Wilson Drive, keep going until if you think you've walked enough, then keep going because you haven't walked enough. It was just everyone was smiling ear to ear. He was talking about PA. Like most of that crowd is probably from PA or Jersey, right? When you think about it. And everyone sort of probably got the reference, which is, even if you didn't know this band, if this is your first night there, you're like, I know King of Prussia Mall, and what's this guy talking about? What band stops and talks for 5 minutes and tells a story about Eastern and Western thought diverging and science.
Well, that got pretty heady, that part.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it? It's a Shakespeare quote, right? Full of sound of fury, signifying nothing. Right. It's like, it's a lot of word salad where Trey explains, in quotes, I'm putting explains, science, religion, and philosophy used to be the same thing, all in one. Yeah. And it's, and you can hear the crowd, they're hanging on every word, cheering at certain parts, not quite booing, but quieter at other parts. And it's so funny listening to the volume of this cheer when Trey mentions Wilson, and people might boo a little bit. He mentions Colonel Forbin or Iculus, and huge explosions. Like these small characters who were in Finbars in Vermont, Trey's senior thesis, are now heroes and villains in an 8,500 seat arena.
And they're part of this myth that like most people in that room at that point probably did know, right? Like it was
sounds like it.
It was a really knowledgeable crowd, and like they had done that Game Hoist show, I think the year before, and that tape was everywhere.
Yeah, that was June 26th, 94.
Yeah,
I think.
And they had done one in 93 that was a really well circulated tape. So if like you were trading tapes back then, like you definitely, someone in your crew was like, you have to listen to Gamehendge. Yep. And you did, and you were like, oh my God, this is so cool. All these stories connect, or all these songs connect through the story. And I didn't know that. And once you know that, right, like you kind of appreciate, and you could tell this crowd, they really appreciate that we were going to get something from Gamehendge, right? It's always special when you do. And then of course, he ties it back to milk and the proliferation of cows and milk and chocolate, and then does the Simpsons thing, which
that's my favorite thing. All this
right.
is the punchline is a Homer Simpson impression.
It's a Simpson gag, which he calls back later, and you learn later that the Simpsons were probably never bigger than they were in '95, right? It was like season 6 or 7 or something, and everyone was watching it at 8:00 on Sundays. And so were they. And like you learn that they like had tapes of it, in their vans because they had a lot of time to pass. And so look, they were like any of us, we're just going to kind of reference, like any group of guy friends, right? You just reference a lot of quotes,
right?
And they were doing it right back to us, which was really fun. And and then the playing, again, I feel like in order to play these two songs, you really have to be feeling yourselves together as a band, and particularly Trey and Phish, which is again a running theme here. But those songs are not easy to play by any means. And so like when they're doing it and they choose to do it and they feel like they obviously plan this, right? Because they sort of,
you don't just come up with this monologue off the top of your head.
No. Yeah. He's like, you guys want to do it? We're going to do it. We're here. Yeah. But, and they probably put a little more thought into it than they might otherwise. But, the way that Famous Mockingbird ends is like a really driving, soaring, very complicated drum and guitar piece. Right. But it was awesome. Everyone there was laughing. Everyone was smiling ear to ear. I remember like high-fiving people around me, like this is hilarious. And no, this was a great way to kind of put a really magical touch on a first set that was already moving along pretty great.
And it's not over yet. It feels like it should be. And when I say should, I just in terms of flow, when I was listening to the set in my car, it just seems like, oh, right, there might be one more like character 0 to close it, but there's much more than just that. There's Stash, which is very good, as it usually is in 1995. It's high energy. It's insistent is the word that kept coming to my mind. Like you couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, and I think I think you had mentioned it too at some point before we started taping. Was like there was this like start moment in the middle of it where it started like descending, like dun, 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 dun,
yes,
dun,
yeah,
and like everybody jumps on it, right? So this is like the first jam. And everyone jumps on it, and it goes from like your typical Stash, I guess, to like where they go to that very dark place. Like they just given us this really happy mythical story, and then they literally joke with us and they hit us over the head with this really dark and scary sonic like moment. And the guy who was with me who had taken a little something, where if you go into a demonic place, you can sometimes get a little nervous and scared, and he did. And I'll never forget, like at that part, he was like kind of holding onto my shoulder, like, hey man. And I was like holding right back, and I was like, dude, just wait. They always pay this off. Like they will not leave you in this headspace. And then they do, they sort of brought it back to that really amazing place where you're like, how do 4 guys go so far apart and then weave back together?
Yeah, it's really a thing of beauty for what Stash used to be. And I'm not saying that it's not as good now, but it's not as good now. But
It's not as good now, but they're different now. They're different for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And they closed the set with Cavern. I would have been thrilled to have it close with Stash. I thought that, you got your money's worth. But they're starting to develop their placements for songs.
Yeah, I mean, and this is like, a little 3-minute, like get everyone back in a good mood. Maybe you're still freaked out a little bit from that Stash you just saw.
Maybe you're still gripping your friend's shoulder.
Yeah, like he's still gripping mine, and like maybe just bring it to a laugh and have a good, funny couple goofy lyrics and a nice little fun rock song and call it a set.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 2.
Set 2 opens with Halley's Comet. Before we get there, though, an 11-year-old makes the audience chest move. Yeah. And even though I can't see it, I really like envisioning. I like having it live in my mind's eye of the cheering. It's almost like someone just hit a double, in a baseball game.
Back then, too, was very rare to see a kid at a show, right? Because the fan base wasn't that old, right? And so this young man was probably there. And I'm not sure if he was maybe a relative or something, but, he made a pretty decent chest move and everyone was cheering him on. And that was fun, like I can't really remember any of the moves.
Of course, yeah.
Because I would show up like a week later and be like, great, I don't know. I knew how to play chess, but that wasn't my concern. But no, it was a cool moment and the chess game was fun.
Halley's Comet itself, it was the first thing I thought of at the beginning of our conversation about this show was when we said that everything's a little quicker, has a little more vibrance. Halley's Comet is the one for me. It's peppy, it's fast, and like Cavern that closed the first set, this is also kind of a 3-minute, short, quick, get in, get out, get everyone in the mood. And just like Buried Alive, the last note of it was the first note of Down with Disease. The last note of Halley's Comet is the first note of Mike's song.
Right. It's almost like a little warm up. Hey, let's get our fingers back. Let's have people dance around and have some fun and then hit them with what's going to be the big stick on this show, in my opinion, which, it's faster. And then the mics even, right? Everything just a little bit like you can't put your finger on like what, BPM it is, but it's just there. And Trey is just playing around the normal notes he plays and really, messing around with it. And the band is just really getting there. This version, man. Where do we start with this? I mean,
I'll start. I mean, I wrote Fishman is the power train behind this jam. First of all.
Absolutely. It's just something.
And the tone of his snare drum is just so fat in 1995. In 1997, you could hear it's like very tight. It's like it's a more clean sound. This sounds a little dirty, almost like he's hitting through a piece of paper, right? Like this is more of a John Bonham.
Yeah. And every time there's a new like fresh piece of paper, just boom, boom, and then his bass drum, like I say, you can really hear it. And I think he and Mike, particularly in this version, really hook up together and set that floor that Trey really and Page really take and layer over the top of. I mean, to me, this version has like 4 sections. It has like,
it is segmented. Yeah.
Yeah. It has like 4 like distinct sections of like, here's the song, the first part until you get to the second jam. Second jam has this really aggressive rock moment. And then they get to this third part that's very quiet, builds to this moment. And then, you have the mini kit part.
It's funny you say that not just the mini kit, but the way that you segmented it. I listened to this, and for anyone listening who hasn't been on the show or doesn't know, I write out almost like stream of consciousness notes as I listen to it. And then I go back and I add in I never delete, but I always add more and kind of try to find bigger picture ideas. But the first part is Mike's song. And then there's this amazing dropout. The whole band drops out with a sustained note before the second jam.
Yeah, it's incredible.
That's what really caught my attention. And then that's when they're playing at about 10 minutes. They're playing these fast, like listening games. This is when you said it gets quiet.
Yeah.
Right. There's no driving melody anymore. It's just everyone doing their own little thing. And you got to listen and catch up with you. But I'm doing this over here. But it all.
And this guy caught on. And this guy caught on. Yeah. That's really, I agree.
And then the third quarter, the third part of your four segments, this is when the wall of sound comes back. The wall of sound from Theme from the Bottom.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's just driving and building, and there's like, some sustained notes that are just kind of building on it. It's almost kind of like what it would be like in 99, right? Where he kept layering on little pieces and pieces and pieces until you get sonically this crazy kind of building. And then, of course, it's 95. So he has to go over to the mini kit.
Right, the percussion kit, which is very, very, it's very audible. I'm used to hearing a lot of 1995 from the tapes that we discussed way earlier, and it wasn't always so easy to tell that Trey was going on to a mini percussion kit.
There's actually a part in Susie Greenberg that we'll get to that, like, I'm pretty sure he's playing it, but you don't really get it. But this is very clear, and actually, this is one of the few ones that I think actually works, right, in terms of the mini kit jams. Like, I actually think Page really does take lead and does drive them to this next place.
He does. He plays the synthesizer also.
Yeah, and it like what I found was like, okay, I don't mind them doing that. I never minded them doing that if it was kind of cool, right? Like the bathtub from Kentucky is like that, where you're like, okay, this actually adds quite a bit to the moment. But and so I did like that it went there. And then of course the last part of the section is they pull back and you wonder, okay, what's coming next? Is it going to be simple? Is it going to, they already did McGrubb, so it's not going to be that. Like, is it going to be, I Am Hydrogen? What's it going to be that comes in here? It's nothing.
Well, it goes right into Weekapaug Groove.
Yeah, right. It's what I mean. It's like for years, ever since the Groove had come out, they'd never just done this, right? They'd never just gone into Weekapaug. And you can kind of feel them a little bit, Brian. I felt, at least there, that they were maybe trying to find something. I'm not sure, like, this not putting anything in between was fully intentional.
Well, I agree. I don't think it was intentional. I think they just kind of found themselves there. And Fishman, I think, is the first one to hook on to the drum beat with Page playing on piano. I think that those two, almost separately but together, found themselves playing Weekapaug Groove, and then the rest of the band joined in. According to Phish.net, this, like you just said, this is the first ever mics into Weekapaug directly. But also, according to Phish.net, they started playing this Weekapaug in a different key than usual.
The wrong key,
So,
yeah.
Yeah, so I think when you hear the vocals, it sounds angular. It's not right.
It sounds like they're shouting, and like,
Yeah.
And you can sort of see it if you watch like the YouTube video. Like, you can see Trey kind of start to laugh, and I remember being there and being like, it does sound different. I just thought maybe it was they were singing poorly, but I didn't have that ear then. I don't think I really probably have it now, honestly.
Yeah, neither do I.
But I was like, I knew something was different, but I think it actually works for what becomes of this Weekapaug, right? Like, other than the sort of out of tune kind of shouting lyrically, they're trying to get to it. I think they have to go like up a little bit, and that's not their register for the song normally. But I think what comes of it is this really cool and unique Weekapaug. Again, why I like the show so much is like, this doesn't sound like other Weekapaugs, and because of where it was foundationally coming from. They kind of have to start out like really quiet. Like you can get into it, because I think your notes are actually really, you kind of shared with me before we started, I thought were really on point.
Well, they just kind of echo what you said, in that they do have to start from almost nothing. And there are points in this recording, the audience recording that I listened to, where the crowd clapping is louder than the instruments on stage. Granted, there are 8,500, or I guess 17,000 hands clapping. Even with this PA, the crowd is kind of on top of the band. And then there's an alien invasion at about 6 minutes, which is a lot of fun.
Oh, man.
But this Weekapaug is not that long.
No, it's not that long, but it goes to so many little places and little nuances. Like, there's even a section in it where Trey is kind of having a call and response to himself. Like, he's doing like a little, he's doing like a little chord, and then he's doing little, notes. And then in the background, you kind of hear Page kind of echoing him, right? And like, I don't know whose podcast, it was yours. I think it was, I'm not sure if it was David Lutz or if it was Fishman's, but we talk about how Fishman can play so fast, but so quietly, which is like a real key to them, right? And I think, we'll get to another song where they do that in. And I was listening to that, and then listening to the show again, I was like, God, that's so perfect of a way to describe it. Of like, how can someone play so aggressively but so quietly? And that's what this song kind of got into. And then, of course, they finally get to the place at the end. But this whole section of music, I love. Like I said, my little ticket stub said sample ? And then I don't think I crossed it out, but and when I got the tape, I was like, I can't hear that. I was trying to hear simple at that time, and I was like, I can't hear it. They just go right into it. And it's this really, really special piece of music that this band put on right at the beginning of this month. It was awesome.
It is. And the cool down always, everything in this conversation is in quotes because they don't cool down at all.
No.
But they next, again, with no break in between, no downtime, is the Mango song, which is, again, it's a perfect cool down from the beginning of the set, even though it's a severely complicated song to play and sing.
Yeah, I mean, this was a hey, what just happened to us? Maybe we should have a sip of water or smoke or, light up a joint or have your beer, right? Like, this was like, take your breath. I mean, even this song is not slow.
No, at all.
The ending of it is very intense and well played. I think this version is well played. It was it was a perfect placement for it, I think. I remember it. It was the first one I saw. And so that was special in that way. And it was just great. Like, I think anytime you get a Mango song, you should be happy.
Agreed.
Your hands and feet are mangoes. Why not?
The next song, there's nothing about this Wilson that's going to stand out against 100 other Wilsons. But what I will say is Wilson is a song that's made for 1995 when they are becoming these arena rock giants. 100%. Wilson is their hardest rocking song.
100%. Couldn't agree more. And it's kind of a funny placement, honestly, like kind of near the end of the second set, but it's always welcome, right? It'll get the crowd going. Everyone's screaming Wilson. It kind of got the interaction back into it, right? After kind of a jam where you could really zone out, it really brought people back to them. And then I think they finish it in a really cool way too. And melts into this, like, where are they going to go, right? They already played Down Disease. What are they going to melt this into, right? And then it goes into Suspicious Minds, which is a Fall
95 special, by the way. I looked at these stats. The only other time I've been able to talk about this one, I think, was when I had a guest on. We talked about that legendary December 6th, 96 show in Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas, they Fishman, had to do it.
Yeah, they had to do it. But this song, Suspicious Minds, the Elvis song, was played 13 times total in their history, and 11 of those times were during this tour with no hold your head up introduction, by the way. Like you just said, it just kind of melted into it.
Just goes, dun, 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 and gets going. He's running around stage with the cape. It was really funny. This is the first time I'd seen it. I hadn't heard that they were doing it. And it was awesome. It was hilarious. And I saw the next one that was in Philly too. So I kind of saw the last two of this tour, and they were great. I mean, anytime you get Fishman out there to sing, I'm down for. Let the guy stand up and stretch his legs a little bit, man. He's the hardest working guy in the band.
Agreed, absolutely. And he'll get the laughs.
He's hilarious. He's up there. He's got the cape with the lights on, and he's running around. And when they're doing the build up, and he actually sings this one pretty well, I think. At the end, he really belts it out. So I was happy to see this. And then, thankfully, he goes back and sits behind the drum set for this last song of this set.
Yeah, which is Bowie into Catapult, back into David Bowie. And I was surprised when I put this on that I thought this was going to be a long, extended, crazy intro. It's not. Because 1995 as a year was kind of the year of, we're going to push your boundaries, speaking as the band to the audience. We're going to push your boundaries. How much can you take? Well, usually it happened in Tweezer, but it also happened in David Bowie intros where it's like, we're just going to fuck around to the point where there might not even be music coming from the stage. Are you still going to be there for us? And that did not happen this time. Trey immediately recites Catapult and then does a Simpsons secret language. And my thought was, I wonder if this is his way of apologizing for Suspicious Minds.
Right, kind of like, oh, sorry, everybody, you had to see that, but now we're going to get you back involved. We're going to do some funny stuff. We're going to move quickly. Yeah, man. I mean, I remember I saw Bowie at the Man that summer. That was like 38 minutes and was really scary and could have been put offish. For a lot of people, I think it was, honestly. But no, this one's like, hey, we're getting into it. We're gonna have some fun. We kind of figured this was the last song because the set felt really long at this point. Actually, both kind of did, and so we were really excited to see this. And this build up and then that when they go into it is just one of the best moments in music, in my opinion. And I think they nail this version. And I'm not gonna say it again, but I am. It's just a little bit faster.
Well, it's funny to say it's faster. Because my thought is during the jam, I guess I should say that it was a very slow and steady build for the jam.
Oh yeah, when they get to the jam, it just goes quiet. It's like the lights went off and it deflates to nothing. But it made me think of your comment about how can someone play so quietly? Like, he's there, right? Like, and he's doing that, like, 16th quarter note, like he's there doing it, but you can barely hear a thing. I mean, and this Bowie is like one of the coolest, quickest ones I've ever experienced, right? Like, just really good playing, and kind of encapsulates the whole night of like, this is actually when I hear Page the best, and actually when I hear Mike the best. And so it's almost like after the whole end of the night, Paul finally got like the mix right?
Just in time.
Just in time for this really cool thing. And, and then they end, and I don't know what else you want to say about those. This one was really cool and just very quick. Like I said, that, and what I'll talk about the show is like, there's nothing in here that's going to get people like, man, that was the best version of X, or that was the best jam I've ever heard. But like from start to finish, I'm like, wow, this is, again, pound for pound, the best 2-set Phish show I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's hard to beat. The encore, though, we're not done.
We're not done.
Because they come back on for Susie Greenberg. And my first thought, now that I'm much older than I was in 1995, but the first thought that came to my mind is, I can't believe they still have this much energy left. The pace and the amount of push in this Susie Greenberg. Everyone's had their time to shine during the show, but you and I have said a number of times this is part of the mix and maybe the architecture of the venue itself. But there wasn't a lot of Page. It wasn't very Page forward. But
nope.
Man, does he have his turn during this Susie.
I would say to anyone who like, I don't think Page is good. I mean, no one says that, but I think this is some of the best Page of the month. Like, just crushing piano. You can hear his energy, and and Trey gives him that space, right? I think like right when they go into that second part where he usually kind of drops out and does like the rhythm guitar stuff, lets Page flow. I think he either stops or he plays the mini kit. I can't really tell, but if he played the mini kit, he didn't want to overpower him with like a cowbell or anything, or a woodblock or anything. It's very quiet. It just sounds like the three of them almost. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because listening to it, like right before we started this, I was like, God damn, I got to listen to this version more. It's so good. And it's Susie Greenberg. It's like the perfect kind of encore song, gets you pumped to go out of there. It
leaves you wanting more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I think everyone walked out of this show with a big, huge smile on their face. Such an energetic show. And I talk about the show all the time. And so thank you so much for having me, Brian. I had a really good time, and I love your podcast, and make sure people, if you're not listening to Attendance Bias, you really should. It's really, really good.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I have a feeling that if I usually didn't try to get these episodes down to about an hour plus, right? About what I assume is someone's commute is kind of what my goal is. I feel like we could have had a 3-hour discussion about this show, this 2-set show. And because there were so many left turns and alleyways conversationally that we could have gone down with this. So I really appreciate you not only selecting a wonderful show, but being so prepared, being so excited. And it really made it for me. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, my man. And look, I'm happy to come and talk about any other shows I've ever been to. And I'm going to tell everyone I know, like, go check out Attendance Bias. This show is really fun.
And that's it for my conversation today with Jeff Carroll about Hershey 95. But in an hour and 20-minute conversation, we have a rather extensive fact check to go over today. So it is now time for the Attendance Bias Fact Check.
Attendance Bias Fact Check.
At the beginning of the episode, I made a big deal about how few guests have chosen shows from 1995 to talk about on this podcast. As of the time of this recording, 4 guests have chosen either shows or jams from that watershed year. Today's show, December 1st, 1995 at Hershey Park Arena, was officially released by Live Phish on March 20th, 2007. Jeff repeatedly refers to seeing Phish earlier in 1995 at the Mann Center in Philadelphia. Those shows were on June 24th and 25th of that year. Incidentally, I had tapes of those shows as well, and the sound quality was just as bad as the Hershey tapes I had. My friend Damon, who was on the podcast to talk about the fall 1995 tour, spoke about the show on October 8th, 1995 at the Adams Fieldhouse in Missoula, Montana. To get to this show, Jeff mentions that his mom would not drive him from Princeton, New Jersey to Hershey, Pennsylvania on a Friday night. A quick Google Maps search shows why. It's a 2-hour-plus drive each way that actually goes right past the 9th Cube in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. Jeff calls Hershey Park Arena a, quote, 100-year-old hockey stadium. The arena opened in 1936, so we're almost at 100 years, but not quite yet. Continuing the geographic fact check, Jeff estimates that the band had to drive 500 miles from their previous show to this one. Looking it up, the previous show before Hershey was in Dayton, Ohio. Between the two stops, the band had to drive 450 miles. That was a pretty good guess, Jeff. December 9th, 1995, with the amazing You Enjoy Myself, was at the Knickerbocker Arena in Albany. Jeff suggests that the band wasn't playing Wolfman's brother a lot in 1995, compared to today at least. According to the fact check, Wolfman's was played just 6 times in the calendar year of 1995, all on this fall tour. The Shakespeare quote that I used to describe Trey's monologue during Forbin's Mockingbird is from Act 5, Scene 5 of Macbeth. It's right after Macbeth hears about his wife's suicide. The quote in full reads, "Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." Which, not to get ahead of myself, is a pretty good description of the Forbin's narration in this show. And finally, the bathtub gin from Kentucky that Jeff references is from November 7th, 1996 at the Rupp Arena in Lexington. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you to Jeff Carroll for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You can leave a rating and a review of it on your favorite podcast app. You can also go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can to keep operating costs to a minimum. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.